Welcome to the Saltwater Edge podcast. Today's guest interest in fishing began in Florida in Christmas Day, 1988, with a Mickey Mouse rod. Soon after that, his obsession for fly fishing began with a box of old flies and his dad's fiberglass fly rod. Most of his non-traditional youth was spent in Brazil when he wasn't breaking horses or working on a ranch. He was exploring the wilderness and the waterways, searching for natural materials he could spin up to imitate local berries that catch Pacou. We'll cover that in a minute. About 20 years ago, our guest moved to Maine, where his obsession with wild salmonids and chasing stripers on the beautiful, expansive flats, the Gulf of Maine, started. His saltwater flies are known for being functional and realistic and heavily influenced by the brilliance of Bob Popovic. In 2022, our guest decided to leave his career as a senior engineer at a big biotech firm to pursue his tying, teaching, and guiding full-time. Please welcome Captain Ben Whalley to the Saltwater Edge podcast. Hey, Ben, how we doing?
Good. Thanks so much for having me, Peter.
You betcha. A couple days before Christmas, so 1988, that's like, I'm not good with math in my head, something like 35 years ago or 20. Yeah.
Yep.
Am I right?
Yep.
First try?
Yep.
Excellent.
Dead on.
So that was down in Florida, right? And literally a Mickey Mouse rod?
Yeah. My grandfather got me a Mickey Mouse rod for Christmas when I was 3. And I went down with him, who was super paranoid about me, catching anything with sharp hooks. And what do I hook but a barracuda? And for some reason, my dad just stood back and watched me handle the thing and like a pro. and I didn't get hurt, but yeah, that really
wouldn't be much of a fly. Wouldn't be much of a fly tying career if.
I know exactly.
Yeah, exactly, Jerry. Yeah, it's because it's I'd heard that it started young, and then you had a rather untraditional. You describe it, youth. It was Florida, but then Brazil. What was Brazil about?
Yeah, so my dad is an artist, and when he got out of art school, out of RISD, he decided felt a calling, whatever, and him and my mom moved up to upstate Pennsylvania, where I was born, to help run an orphanage.
Oh wow!
And then from there, he kept in touch with someone he met while in college who was looking to set up a home for street children down in South Florida and then Brazil.
Yeah.
So from there, we ended up in Florida to start. And my dad still was doing some art, but was also a director for this program. And then eventually, when I was pretty young, moved down to Brazil, and that's where I grew up until I was 8.
On a big ranch and not going to high school,
so,
right?
Yeah. So it was, the structure. I lived amongst the street kids, and kind of grew up with them as brothers. And part of the program was to kind of help rehabilitate these kids that, didn't know how to love, didn't trust anybody. And one method of doing so was to do it through animals. So I had a huge passion, just like my passion for fishing and fly fishing, for horses.
Oh,
so
no kidding.
We ended up having 35 horses at one point that I trained and broke my body doing. And then we also had to
help the kids deal and adjust.
Yeah, and I taught them responsibility as far as caring for them and feeding them, and then horses being such a large and dangerous animal, learning how to approach them and properly care for them was huge for them.
Sounds like quite non-traditional, and to end up, I think at that point you guys moved back to Maine, right? So you basically arrived in Maine 18 years old without having gone to high school. Is that a good summation of but Brazil is outside and yeah. So first I wanted to ask you, it's Paku, right?
Paku, yeah.
Yeah, and they eat berries.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's something down in Costa Rica, Machaca or something like that. Similar kind of.
Similar. Yeah.
Wow, very cool. And what kind of fish was that? Tell me just a quick little bit about the Paku fishing, because he did it with fly rod, huh?
Yeah. Yes, I did. And it was kind of weird growing up in Brazil. I was introduced to fishing in South Florida and, party boats and going out with my dad when I was young. And then we moved to Brazil, and it was everything about it was reverting 100 years back in this country, like
Sure.
cane rods and
Wow.
tenkara style fishing.
Yeah.
I did that a lot, which honestly the skills transfer over. But we also had a lake and a pond on the property, and one of them had it was stocked at some point, but they somehow reproduced. But it had a huge population of Paku in it, and then we had a river that ran around the property that had wolffish, kind of those Haida is what they're called. So those are super fun to kind of figure out. And
So you got to fish
but they look.
You got to fish during
Yeah,
that Brazil.
Yeah, they look like, I don't know, a cross between a piranha and a permit almost.
Oof.
But live in fresh water and eat nuts, berries.
Yeah.
Berries. Yeah, they're called like the Nutcracker, I think, is their nickname.
Yeah.
You can imagine where that came
look,
from.
I'm getting in the water.
Yeah.
So you're in Maine, you're 18, and I know you moved up there with your dad to take care of your grandmother, as I recall, and then there, University of Maine, right?
Yeah, I somehow fumbled my way through in a couple of weeks getting my GED, and then heard about this program up at UMaine for non-traditional students, which I was like, I think I fit the bill.
Yeah, you catch up right there. So it would.
Yeah, what I didn't realize is half the class were ex-convicts and the other half were middle-aged women going back to school. So
you didn't quite fit the demo on either of those.
No, exactly.
More non-traditional.
But yeah, so that was an experience, and it was a huge culture shock leaving Brazil. My friends, my family, everybody I knew, honestly.
Yeah. Right.
And moving to Maine in February.
Oh, yeah.
In a pair of indoor soccer shoes and jeans, and just realizing, like, what have I gotten myself into? I felt so out of the element.
Yeah.
And then I found myself, going off to college and having never taken a formalized test before. And suddenly, I have to kind of live this new role. And, it was a tricky period of life. I mean, during that, I ended up injuring myself and then hanging out with the wrong, ended up, unfortunately, through that, having a long addiction to painkillers. So that's been, that was for 15 years.
You'd mentioned the horses did a number on your back at one point, right? Wasn't
it?
With a little wear and tear on you too.
Yeah. But luckily 12 years ago, got clean, never looked back, and
good for you.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it makes me who I am. I'm not ashamed of it. Right. I think it's, this is the first time I think on a broader scale I've mentioned it, but I think all fishermen have that addictive tendency, whether it's for fishing or whatever, No, luckily I feel like I can harness it now in the direction of time flies.
Yeah. Well, look where it's got you. I mean,
exactly.
Right. I mean, I wholly agree with, it's the choices and the experiences that you've had that got you here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
100%.
Because I was interested in bringing up this non-traditional and getting to Maine and really not having been to high school, traditional high school. but the fishing was a constant. When did you sort of re-engage on fishing in Maine, during college, or?
Yeah. Yeah, when I first moved to Maine, I was doing some construction jobs and training horses. And I got into striper fishing
There you go.
with spin gear,
Ah,
because that was kind of how I was introduced to them. And it was early 2000s. I mean, it was insane
yeah,
in the mid coast area of Maine.
yeah,
Yeah. So that was really cool. And then I got shipped up to Maine in Orono, which is quite a ways
from the water. Yeah,
from the water, but it's an hour or two removed from some incredible, trout and salmon streams.
I see.
So me and buddies used to, every day after school,
Make a run
after
for
classes, we'd run up,
Yeah.
an hour each way and spend our time up there. And it was gorgeous. I just, it was something, having grown up in a tropical climate, like suddenly I'm surrounded by these mountains and Baxter, and you're chasing these beautiful brook trout. I was just captivated by it. I still am. Saltwater will always have my
Yeah.
heart, though.
But it might be the prettiest fish, those brook trout, especially a Maine brook trout. Something else.
Yeah.
Moving to the saltwater, and you live down in Portland now.
Yep.
And yeah, I understood you did some shore guiding for a while, and then skiff guiding, and you really focus on flats fishing, right? Although you have plenty of, you can go out front, but there's it's Casco Bay for you, right? And isn't it just
Yep.
a pretty big enclosed, I mean, massive enclosed area, right? I mean, I've never fished
Yep.
it, I've driven by it, and you're driving and you're
Yeah.
driving. I don't know if it's the road weaving around or what, but it seems like it's out the window for a fairly long time when you go through
Yeah.
around Portland.
It's huge. So yeah, I started doing guided trips first in freshwater and quickly switched over to saltwater,
Yep.
doing wade trips in Saco Bay, which is the next bay south of Casco
Yep.
Bay. And I did that, in all my spare time from 2015 until I decided to do it full time.
Yeah.
And so that was super educational, like good experience, I feel like, because with a boat it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to have this exclusive feeling for clients,
Mhm.
where you're not only targeting waters that no one else can. It's trickier without private access
Right.
to provide that to clients. But it really kind of gave me an insight into, it's more about the experience at the end of the day. We're all doing it to go fishing, right? We want to catch fish.
Right.
But the experience is so much of it too, especially in the fly realm. I feel like, we're all gluttons for punishment. And we understand that we're hobbling ourselves to the fullest,
Right.
but we do it because we want to do it in that manner, right? We've gotten to that point in our careers.
Yep.
And, it may revert or it may be cyclical, but, so it's the experience of shallow water fishing, or even wade fishing, which is shallow water, because you can access it for the most part. It's just a very intimate, whether you're on a 17-foot skiff, or you're side by side, wading the sand flats or the rock ledges we have up here. So it's a lot easier to make it feel exclusive now from a skiff, though. And Casco Bay versus Saco Bay is very open to the ocean, so you're at the will of winds and big tides and stuff, more so than Casco Bay, which is sheltered with islands on the outside.
I heard there's like the calendar islands, like suggesting there's 365 of them.
Yep. And there are, yeah.
Damn near. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Because you can always get out Lee and everything else, and it would be private because the sight lines would be knocked down by all the islands too, I would
Right.
imagine. Yeah. The
Yep. And it allows you, given that we get, winds quite frequently, high winds, being able to have all those islands, it just gives you areas to tuck and hide so that as a fly angler, you still have shots.
yeah, yeah, and
So
it's shallow water fishing as well.
yeah,
So
yep,
you're, you mentioned the working with spin rod, and then the different ledges and flats and all that, but all that produces scenarios and problems that need solutions, right? And that's the thing I've
yep,
noticed in your fly tying, and I think it's apart from your mentor, but that the idea that a pattern or a plug, for all intents and purposes, has to solve a problem, right? And how do you, if that's the premise, how do you maybe identify the problem you're trying to solve? I mean, what take us,
yeah.
give us a scenario on a flat or something like that, and how are you breaking that down? And then
Yeah.
I do want to understand
So
fly design part secondarily, but what do you on the water practically? How does that work for you?
yeah. So I mean, in my corporate career that I left, I had gotten formally trained in Six Sigma and Lean.
Yeah,
Got my black belt there, and my role at this for many years was to solve these complex problems, whether manufacturing or quality. I was on
that's to create a
quality
better
teams.
process, right? I mean, is that the solve?
Lean is
That's what lean means.
and then there's the Six Sigma, which is structured problem solving,
Okay.
right? So many people just want to guess at solutions when
Yeah.
you have a problem,
You're literally
which,
formally trained in it.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
which,
Excellent.
yeah, anytime there was a $1 million+ problem, I would get pulled in on a team and, to get to the root cause quick,
Yeah.
and that's one thing that's carried over, both the quality, in that career, quality was number one always. And then, with my fly tying and just, I don't know, I'm a little borderline OCD maybe. And
Comes in
it
handy as a
just
fly type.
drives me nuts. Yeah, it drives me nuts to know I could produce better, or to know that, like, it would drive me crazy if I felt like my flies were out there and weren't my top notch. And
Yeah.
granted, that top notch changes year over year.
You get
I
better, you
look
tweak
back,
it. Yeah. Yeah.
but at the time that I sell it, like, for me, that's the best I can put out. I won't let anything else out, and it's blessing and a curse, but people appreciate it,
Yeah.
and
When you're out there, does that process, that thought process you've been trained in, does that apply to you? Out there on the water, client and about
yeah,
there. I'm just trying to see if there's because I think it's you
oh
literally
yeah,
trained in it. You don't walk away from it. It's not like you know what I mean. It's something you know how to do. I would think you'd look at.
yeah.
I feel like your fly designs do, and I'm just wondering if it carries to the water as well.
Yeah, one of the most prominent and solutions to almost any problem I encountered in that role could be, it was so, almost every single one was so obvious once you determined root cause,
Mm-hmm.
but almost every one I solved was simply observing it, So the same goes, and Popovic teaches us too, like, to become a better observer. Like, that is number one, right? And, whether I used to do a lot of nighttime surf casting with a fly rod.
Okay.
Whether it be you're out there in the dark and you realize that after however long, half hour, you reel in and the fly's fouled, or,
Mm-hmm.
you have seaweed on it. It's like, you can't have that. They won't bite it, like, physically. Yeah. So you're shooting yourself in the foot. So, iteration wise, like, going back and trying different designs or techniques, those things build on themselves across all the flies. But, I think time on the water and just observing, on the flat, watching the fish's reaction to a fly, and knowing different, every client has different presentation skills or whatever. But there are day over day, similar situations, and you're like, yeah, that didn't look right. And sure enough, the keeling on a fly I was trying out just was slightly off, and so it was rolling when the client was stripping the way I told them to.
I think of
So,
observation, if you crank up your observation, make it the priority that you do, and I agree, that's going to increase your stealth. And your stealth is your greatest advantage anyway. If they don't know you're there, that's a great place to start, right? And so if you can really, and so I used to like just get wade into the water and get going, right? And it's like, no, lower, and it's not my DNA at all, right?
yeah.
It's
but it's the same with trout fishing, being able to show up on a river and just sit there for 5 minutes and watch what's either coming off the water or activity of fish, flip over rocks and see what bait, what bait, what critters are crawling on the bottom.
There's no fisherman out there that wouldn't benefit from it.
Oh yeah, and I mean the same is true every time I hop up on my polling platform. You start easing in on these flats, and the tides, our tides are huge, and it changes. The flats are so incredibly different from one to the other, and they're small windows, so you have to have a lot of spots.
I was thinking that when you first described the islands, and I know about the tide in Maine, I'm like, well, that means Maine has to have a lot of stops on a given tide, much more than we would have south of the Cape.
Right.
It's it's interesting because I think we talked a bit about the process, but and observation being important to that. When you think of your flies and the different patterns, what are a few of your favorites and why, and what problem did they solve? In other words, I flipped through the website, benwhalleyfishing.com, and I saw the Asian crab, for example. That's not a native thing, but it's a real thing. It's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And you had couldn't recognize the material from the one on the website, but it certainly suggests an Asian crab, in the darker olive color and all that. But I was just curious. It's certainly shape, it's profile shape, whatever you want to call that, silhouette.
Yeah.
It's
depends
size. I'm sorry.
It's interesting.
How do you
back when I used to, so for the crab, for instance, everybody I feel up here. So I'm not the first that started fishing crabs. That was already kind of underway. But I do think in scenarios the crab and imitation matters. But on other times, like I did some tests, it's hard to do controlled experiments, which again, I was trained in doing with fish because you don't have a control, right?
Right.
But time after time, I would do these things with my buddy Travis, who I'd fish with every day. And, we'd both cast out, and he'd fish a crab fly very similar to either what I gave him or what he was fishing. And I would fish just lead dumbbells on a hook. So the only difference is material. And it's funny how often I could catch just as many of them because it was more of a stimulator.
Wow.
Dragging on bottom, kicking up the sand and mud.
Right. Being alive.
Than like the actual imitation. Yeah. But that said, I think many times having a crab on white sand when they're high sun and they're cruising and looking for something realistic, in clear water, where throwing a bare hook with lead dumbbells isn't going to cut it.
Yeah. But the fact that it did in that other scenario, what came into my head is that it looked alive. That puff of mud is movement's life,
Yep.
right? And so that's enough for them, to fire on it. Pretty wild.
Yeah. And it's interesting as far, I just found while I was unpacking some stuff in my basement yesterday, a bag. I'm not kidding you, probably that big gallon bag of different crab imitations I did over the years that I didn't throw away.
Bring that in January. I'd love to take a look through that.
And I also found several big bags of like my first hollow flies, and like they're terrible, but it's very cool. I sent them to a couple of friends who were, I'm like, it's embarrassing, but it's really cool to see the progression. Absolutely. So I love that. Yeah. But every single one of those taught me something. Mm-hmm. Like, because you take that and you, like, that's the thing I love the most about going out. Like, you see something, you tie it, next day you test it, because you saw a bait doing a specific thing on whatever X flat. You go home, tie it, and try it the next day and gauge their behavior, or gauge how the fly swims, or how it, hits the water when it lands, or how it sinks through the column. And, right. I think one of the flies that I end up fishing the most on the flats is a shrimp fly. And, there's the ultra shrimp, which Bob came up with years ago that lots of people
ultra
fish.
Shrimp is DevCon or epoxy and or Solares, whatever, and ultra hair, right? The crinkly nylon hair, and then some other stuff, but and a hackle, right? So all those materials, save the hackle, have changed since he did it out of what was available in the day. But I don't know that anyone really feels like they got the killer shrimp flies. So you've taken that ultra and tweaked it some.
Well, for me, there's certain areas that works just fine. Yeah. And it's a great pattern. There's nothing wrong with the pattern. Right. But for me, and it's the same thing when it came to the beast, to the hollow, to the bulkhead, like every one of us, Bob developed those patterns. They are versatile, but every beach from Rhode Island to Maine, the baits are different sizes. The terrain is different, and I can't fish. Like we don't have a ton of just sand beaches that Bob had, or deep channels like that.
He has miles of it.
That's right. And so suddenly, with the ultra shrimp, I end up fishing it in under a foot of water, and my client's snagging constantly on oysters or, on something. So that's what sent my mind. Like, I need to come up with a fly that imitates these grass shrimp, but also hovers and doesn't foul and snag, right? So that's where the evolution of the champagne shrimp kind of came to be, where you have a jig hook, 60-degree jig hook, and you end up using a carapace material with foam, and then the Avalon style beads on the bottom. So it actually suspends.
Yeah, it turns over too.
And it doesn't go. Yeah. So that's been highly effective for me and my clients. But similarly, looking at a lot of the other patterns, clouds, like a black clouser, high sun, no sun, doesn't matter. A small black clouser with fluorescent orange eyes outfishes everything, but it ends up snagging on shit. Right. So I ended up, coming up with a bend back version that fishes very similar, using channel lead, and it looks just the same. But so it's a lot of looking. I'm not necessarily. I'm sure someone else has done a very similar and named it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say I created it, but it's, again, just like Bob did for his patterns in his waters. That's the goal for me, and if I can have flies, I think, cover every base in the waters I guide in, success.
I think I think I heard or read that Bob Popovic, doesn't really, tie flies for Florida or another place. He is more about a shape and a movement, maybe a broad bait, or he's got a whole slide deck that's actually very interesting.
Yeah.
Eons old, but the gist of it is, there's only a handful of shapes, a broad profile, a sand eel, and something in between, and then critters, be it crab, shrimp, those kinds of things, critters, worms, spring worms or something like that. Yeah. The So I mean, it sounds like you're saying that you're really optimizing a
and the same, for the beast fly, it was for years, I always would tell people that's got to be a Jersey thing, because we didn't have menhaden up here, like they were wiped out. And then, so our window was only herring for a couple weeks.
That's right, it was during that bunker. Right, I remember now.
Yep. Yeah. And, we started seeing herring, and then the bunker started popping back up. And that's really when I was like, all right, I'll start trying to tackle these. And again, it was trial and error. You end up tying them and watching them swim in a faster current. Fast currents reveal a lot, about keeling and whatever it is, sink rates but it's that trial and error that gets you to the point where, hey, I can cast something, someone who can't cast phenomenal can cast these things easily enough when tied a specific way, right? Which you only get to by doing it, trying it, and rinse, repeat, right? Until you tweak it enough so that you understand, it's great that Bob has shared the step-by-step. That book, Fly Design, Pop Flies, best books of all time, in my opinion.
Right.
But, I think that's a foundation and a base. And to look at that, or look at Instagram photos and tie up these flies, there's a football field between the two, between practical and looking good, right? And it just takes years and years of that optimization to kind of get it to the point where it's fully functional, right? Mm-hmm. And can be fished around the globe.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I was just thinking about your current in Maine. If you have these bigger tides, you have more water moving in that 6 hours or 5 hours and 50 minutes, whatever it is, right? In that period of time, you must, if you have more feet, right? So a fly that might swim well in more moderate current that we would have down here might get all thrashed to hell up there. And therefore require the tweaks, whether it's that channel lead you mentioned, or flipping the eyes on the bottom, or whatever. But tweaks to optimize platform or design to function better in your stretch of beach. That accounts for an awful lot of fly designs that are nearly the same as something that's already out there. I mean, I think you already said there's not much that's new. I always sort of take the expression about fishing, whether it's, if I walk out into the saltwater edge, there was a soft plastics boom, and there was a tin boom, there was a wood boom, and, bell bottoms are coming back. I mean, all this stuff just cycles through, right? I mean, we'll be on a bucktail jig boom again before long. It's just how it is. Sometimes
I feel like the curiosity and the drive to improve, and the, in lean terms, Kaizen effect of that repetitive improvement, even small scale repetitive improvement. You do enough of those, just like with inventions, you're going to come across one that hasn't been done before and really changes the game, i.e., like Lane's Game Changer platform, right? You look through his book, and the amount that he trialed to get to where he did, I think he's a phenomenal example and model of kind of person and career that I want to mirror,
Yeah.
but so much of that goes unnoticed, right? Maybe on a small level, but
Well, there's all the
most
stuff that
people
didn't work.
haven't seen all of that, right?
I mean,
But that
Alexander
is just
Bell
as
says,
valuable.
I know, I don't, yeah, I'm known for creating the light bulb. I know 999 ways not to make one too,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
not showing up and staying curious,
Yep.
that takes a
Yep.
special kind of person, I think.
Yep.
So we maybe I guess I want to jump to this. I did hear. I'm looking for a couple of pro tips from you. One of the ones I was heard on another occasion podcast you were on was talking about was a story of you and Bob, and you showed him a fly that had peacock curl, which is absolutely beautiful, and you find it long enough, it sweeps over the top of a fly, and that's what I was imagining the situation was. And he said, "Go swim it." And
Yep.
I mean, that's observation, that's testing. And it seemed to me that we should talk about that because they're probably going to call out a couple things that have been themes for you, right? So tell us that story. You went out, you had a pretty cool looking fly. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Well, no, this is just an example. It's swimming.
Okay.
Can you see the hackle like separated up?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the peacock, right?
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of what I was describing.
Yeah.
When I put a GoPro underwater and looked at this pretty, I think it was a beast fly, and that I had beautiful, peacock curl over the top that I had,
flies are darker on the top.
Yeah. Yep. And you do the trick to make it contours at the top, and it looks gorgeous. And yet when I put a GoPro underwater with a current, suddenly you have the body of the fly here, and this thing is just kind of flexing with it and separating, right? Which I don't think matters, like flatwings. I was talking to Cordero about this. So much of flatwings you're throwing in the surf, right?
Yeah.
And the movement and the profile from underneath, they're not looking at a separated,
individual, right? Yeah.
Individual peacock, and so it's different depending on the fly. But I think for sure, if you have, I just know from personal experience, if you have a piece of seaweed that length on your fly that you're stripping through, you will not get a bite. Like, I've done it time and time again. Like, unless something crazy goes and there's a crazy blitz or something. But if I'm just fishing off my ledges or any spot, like, they just won't hit it. So similarly, it could very well, same thing with hackles going too far beyond the body of the fly, right? If it's more than like an inch, suddenly it looks like it could be seaweed hanging off of it. So,
well, when I thought about it, what you were describing, I thought, the rest of the fly has a stiffness and a profile that then the peacock doesn't. It's sideways, it's flat and stiff, and it's gonna wing, and it looks gorgeous in your hand. But I agree, that picture you showed me looks like shit, and you're not gonna get a bite on something like that, right? So, it's how it all comes together.
Dependent, right? Species dependent too. Stripers may care a lot more than GTs, for instance, right?
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So we talked about a couple of things. We talked about how your flies solve problems, and that's an idea that I think you. It sounds like you and Bob share. Let me ask you that real quick. How did you guys come to meet? Because philosophically, you share some ideas for sure, and he's been around a lot longer. But it sounds like you were just rummaging around in Maine, right?
Yeah. So a good buddy of mine, Travis, incredible fly tire. He's not really present on social media or anything, but he was the one that kind of turned me on to hollow flies and bulkheads. And, I learned a great deal just from talking to him, and I didn't own Bob's book for years.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of experimented on my own. And it's not saying that I came up with, I know some people heard me saying this on a different one. And I thought I was claiming stakes to that I discovered what Bob did on my own. I was, that wasn't the case. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. So I was kind of pushing along, learning and dialing this on my own process, right? And Ian Devlin, who's in Connecticut,
Oh, sure.
Captain Ian Devlin, his father lives up here, and it was right around Christmas time. He reached out and was like, "Hey, I'm going to be up visiting family. Mind if I stop in?" And I was like, "Sure." So he swung by, totally random. We hung out for the afternoon, tied some flies, and when he left there, I guess he went back down. I didn't hear this until later when Bob came on a podcast I was doing, South Shore Flycasters one. But I guess he went down and told Bob, you gotta meet this guy. And within a week or so, him and I were kind of in touch and going back and forth. And
Ian's a very creative guy himself. I mean, those wide profile flies, it's like you're all trying to solve the same riddle. Right? And that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem looking for a solution. And here's these different guys coming at it. You're gonna, benefit from talking to each other and sharing ideas and be, coincidentally inspired, maybe coming up with something, relative.
That's honestly been the one and the only big thing Instagram has served for me from day one is having that access at the tip of your hands from people around the globe, that you now can tap into that are doing phenomenal, outstanding fly tying, and you can just shoot them a DM and ask them, like that wasn't feasible before.
Right. No, I inspiration is, that Van Wyck in, or for example, or just all the Jason Taylor stuff to keep it close to home. You don't see much of it, but it is wild, right? And it's
Jason will forever, I think, be the pinnacle for me to try to achieve. I'm obsessed with his flow, his style of fly tying, which I'm super excited to get to hang out with him at the Stock the Box event coming up.
Yeah, we'll hit that. The Stock the Box that Ben just referred to is a Saltwater Edge event in January 2021 of 20th and 21st here in Newport, 2024. So this podcast will come out well before that, but podcast will last forever afterwards. And hopefully we got a 2025 and a 2026. So, but it's a new idea, actually an idea of a guy out in the Midwest, Mike Schultz. And we're excited to give it a try. It's going to be a bunch of the very best fly tyers from the Striper Coast together to learn from each other, to teach everybody else something. It's going to be a fun time. But I agree with you about social media, strengths, positives and negatives for sure. But that connection to people and ideas is probably the biggest plus until, and they start to figure you out and they just keep, I get flies and, flies and lacrosse are what they go through my,
your feed.
Yeah. So, but I enjoy it, and it is inspiration, and it gets me. For myself, I went for a period where I wasn't tying very much, but I love it, and I'm better for it. If I got a cup of coffee and I'm tying flies in the morning, it's a good day, and so. But it helps me say, you know what, I'm gonna got some yak here. I'm gonna try to get my brain around that. Between Rue Harvey and Drew Ciccone, I should be able to. There's great video. I mean, it's really never been. We're in some kind of a heyday or renaissance or whatever the hell you want to call it of fly tying, especially saltwater in my mind. Well, I guess the streamer guys on the musky outside are going off too. But for me, I've never really seen it like I see it now. It's really is inspiring. I'm really excited for that upcoming event. Just the whole where this thing's going. But I think you're right. Flies have to solve problems, and they can look good on Instagram, but how do they swim?
Yeah.
And, you've already made the point about observation and testing and iterating. And, one of the things you talked about, I wanted to say earlier, you talked about not having a control. You got a better one than most people because you go today and you go tomorrow and you go the next day. I mean, you got about 120 days a year, right?
Yeah, I did 130 this year.
Yeah. So there is a control that a lot of the rest of us cannot avail ourselves of. Like the next day is not as close to sampling as you can do, right? And you go home and iterate on something, and or do you find yourself using the same handful of flies a lot? So in other words, you've iterated to a good solve, and you that's your nail, and you bang it, or do you do you end up having a big box with a lot of variety? And I'm just curiosity question.
So I end up a lot of times, I have my tried and true, and if fishing is like phenomenal, I'll throw something experimental on. But most days I do have like tried and true patterns that have just worked for me on specific flats at specific conditions. So I'll stick to those for the most part. But I also either go before to scout. This year required a lot of it just because of the rain we got. It was just messing everything up. So either before or after doing some scouting. And that's when I'll test stuff out. And, depending what I see there, if it's successful on, this flat that I saw today, tomorrow when I fish it, I might throw that on, versus the tried and true. But I don't know. I try not to do too much experimenting with clients, unless there's something like I have a good reason to believe that that's going to work.
I mean, how you're a fly tire. How many flies do you carry on the boat? Expect that you might need to use. Are you kitchen sink guy, or is it more as a more thoughtful, curated fly box?
I normally have 3 fly boxes. I have one with like crustacean, shrimp,
critters,
like one of the double-sided, that big. With quite a few of the same ones, I try to keep it. And then I have another one that's smaller flies, like clouser type flies, smaller ones you can fit in a small box.
Yeah.
And then a bigger one for bigger flies. It's so 3 different kind of boxes.
Yeah, almost without saying it, that is the slide deck that Bob did years ago, right? Big, thin, and critters, and then something in between. Imagine that box is the thin and something in between. Mm-hmm. There's your 4 shapes. Yeah, excellent.
But it's amazing how often, I'm sure we'll hit it at the end. My preferred flies, so I'll give it around. But it's amazing how many confidence flies aren't necessarily, the hottest ones on social media or whatever, beach flies, for instance, it's a niche fly. And I tell people this, and, in Maine, we have the herring run and we have bunker that come up, and you see the last couple of years, I haven't seen much at all of fish busting bunker schools up here, which is sad. It truly is sad. They're on, Brit herring or slightly larger, drop back river herring. And then they switch to silver sides and other sand eels stuff. But so for me, that window isn't huge to use those. So right. I'm not blind casting with those. I end up mostly throwing a 5-6 inch, generic olive over white hollow or bulkhead or something. I think something that can cover multiple, just in case you don't know exactly what size bait in the given spot.
Yep.
Island or rock stockpile. It can, it can pass off as a pollock. It can pass as a mackerel. It can pass as a,
Yeah, I think
herring,
that suggestive
herring.
thing, that suggestive item in the right place will, in a lot of cases get it done. But I think you're also, like you said, if they get a clear water and a long look at it and all these other things,
Right.
it gets tough. So couple things, one of the things I know, and I remember when we first met, well, I knew who you were because your flies are so awesome, but I didn't have a name and a face. So I was walking out of that event in Fenway that Joe Gugino from Costa put on, and you had an ASG, I do today, but an ASGA hat on, and we had a conversation, and I appreciated the fact you come all the way down from Maine to Boston to be a part of the thing, and that the Guide Association and what we were working on was important to you. And I thought I'd give you a second to say, kind of why that is. I've seen you here. We are actually on the last day of comments.
Yep.
For Amendment 2. And I don't want to riff on Amendment 2 for so long. We've gone blue in the face. But
yeah.
Where did the Guide Association resonate with you? Because we were just in DC a couple of weeks ago together.
We were.
You're not home tying flies. You had to take time away to go, try to do some of this work. So I'm just give you an opportunity to explain why it's important to you.
Yeah, I mean, the Guide Association kind of stuck out to me the most. I think after having my daughter, who's now 5, but it was that suddenly having kids, I think changed my mentality a lot as far as less about my goals and my quest.
Yeah.
While I still have those in bucket list or whatever, I still have those, and I feel like I've done pretty well in the striper world for me. But suddenly, my thoughts going to, all right, I'm going to get Vivi out, this year. So at 2.5, I got her to catch salters on fly by herself on flies we tied together.
I was 62 when I caught my first salter on fly.
Yeah. So I'm like, all right, I'm taking the pressure off. But this last year, she caught her first one on fly. Excellent. And those outings are just magical, and the thought, and since I'm on the water every day now, like you really see the impacts. And being in Maine, being the northernmost fringe of the migration, I swear everything is kind of amplified if versus more of the central states that get all the fish pushing through.
Sure.
We're kind of like scattered at best because you have the dense population and then kind of the
tangents of the
parabola distribution of them.
Yeah.
So any negative impacts, and I remember just in the time I was fishing, from 2015, 14 to now, let alone like early 2000s.
Right, early 2000s when you got here, it was going great.
Yeah.
Great guns. Yeah.
But even 2015, 2014 or 2010 when I moved to southern Maine and got into saltwater, to striper fly fishing, really.
Mm-hmm.
To now, like it is insane how we used to be able to go out then and to catch 35 to just shy of 40-inch fish every day was not uncommon. And now if you see those, you're like, whoa. And we still see them, but it's just not as prominent. And so with my daughter and seeing what I've seen, it's just kind of lit a fire under me to do what I can, it's and also knowing the shop owners that I've talked to that were super involved with CCA on the first go around, who are just utterly destroyed and disgusted with the whole thing and want nothing to do with it because it didn't work for them. And it's like, there's a new guard and we need to push this. Like we're the only ones that can speak up about it. Right. Yeah. And if I can use my voice, as little as it is, to to get more people on board, then I'll do whatever I can. So,
Yep.
and the Saltwater Guides Association suddenly gave a voice for the rec angler and for the rec sector guides, charter captains, and I just think that's so valuable. The commercial side has been so organized
Yeah.
and
Well, I
so
think what makes
vocal.
for us is by nature, the different types of fishermen, surf, fly, inshore, for example, as it relates to stripers. I mean, the surf guy comes off a night shift. The fly guy's headed out in the half
Yep.
light to get the morning bite. And the boat guy is the guy who motors by him. We're all doing it. We all share a passion, but
Exactly.
we necessarily, if you read The Art of War, it's divide and conquer. Well, we kind of take care of it. So
Yeah.
this, you and I have also talked about a show the Guide Association is going to do in April called the Striped Bass Expo, where it'll be about striped bass, but the breakout rooms will be surf, fly, and inshore. All the vendors will serve those markets, not necessarily all of them, but some aspect of that group. And then we're going to do a skills competition, surf, fly, and inshore skills competition, and then have a little bit of a couple of films in the evening. So it's a whole day. That's more to follow, but April 13th. The other thing I heard you say about Vivian is, and I've seen it in other guys that say just what you said about, well, it was different. And now I've had kids and they think about it differently. And it's really, you want to share your joy and you want to be able to maybe leave it for them and let them have the same joy. You don't want to take it with you, or be a taker. You want to give, right? And especially to your kid. So whether they love it like you do or not isn't really it, but you want to have had the opportunity to share it with them.
And it's not just my kid. It's, my neighbor's kids. Like,
yeah, no, I got you.
Vivi might not like it, like you said, but the thought
down the street,
the biggest thing, the thought that stripers could suddenly not be present for future generations is honestly very disturbing to me. All because of piss poor management, right? And we can turn the ship around, but we need everybody's voice. We need to put the pressure on the people making the decisions.
Yeah, I think for a long time we didn't have a voice that reflected our weight and our contribution, economic and literally striped bass is every man's fish, right? Catch from a beach, catch from a boat, catch it on bait, catch it on fly, catch it at night, catch it the day, March, November. I mean, it's every man's fish, right? If it's ever one to get right, it's this one, right over my shoulder. And then on top of that, they did that once. It was the shining star of fisheries management. Now through a series of half decisions, we're back to about where we were. So let's change gears. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. What are two, since we've been talking flies most of the time, what are two flies you'd suggest? I think I can probably answer this for you. Probably a 5 or 6 inch olive over white, hollow or bulk, right? Bulkhead, to just sort of be that generic, no reason to pick something else, right? Is that
I agree.
Those?
So in my brain, I'll break it down like this quickly. Yep. You have in Maine, you have ledges or jetties. They're kind of more structural.
Yeah.
I have two flies, the one you mentioned, and then the other one is a fly that it's a huge complex fly that I tie called the Best Bet, and it's a jig style fly. Yep, and it's a jig style fly that has a ton of keel weighting, but it darts more than like a jig.
Right. That'd be nice.
It doesn't foul, and that thing just produces. So for the ledges, those two. For the flat, black clouser, like I was saying, a 2.5 inch black clouser with fluorescent orange eyes, and then that champagne shrimp I was talking about, that one that floats. And then on the weight,
champagne shrimp, that'll probably be my weekend. I'm supposed to open presents this weekend. Anyway,
I know. And then the third bucket, let's say, is wading.
Yeah.
Either the sand or the marsh. And I'd say a crab fly. Maine's different in that everybody fishes a fast sink, like S6, sink great, outbound short, let's say, something like that. or the, every company has the SA, has the triple density, but something that literally just gets it on bottom, then a 2.5, 3 foot leader to a crab fly, and just 6-inch strips, erratic.
Yeah.
And it's just deadly, for Maine. That's how everybody fishes them up here. And it's the best way to catch them.
Yeah.
Like numbers wise.
Sure.
They're
on the lookout.
And then a clouser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. What are 2 resources you find helpful, maybe as you plan your fishing day, or a resource to influence your fly tying, or what are 2 resources?
All right, bucketed answer. U.S. harbors and windy.
Yeah.
I think those ones are both good.
Yeah.
And then the other bucket is Google Maps. And the biggest one for me is your photo library.
Interesting.
It's neat how it does. This year, these memories from this day, being able, especially when conditions are tough, being able to just like look back at that week for the past 10 years, let's say, and see, oh, last year this spot, it's like the Got One app. It's very, very basic, that I think hopefully we can get the Got One to incorporate, like, and build that sort of thing so you can look at your photos. But for me, that is because it geotags it, and you can look by it. So I end up using those a lot.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then 2 tips to improve. And it's funny, I've written, I've used this format for the 25 or 6 podcasts I've done so far. And I realized that these are, set questions, but after listening to you, 2 tips to improve. One is going to be observation. Right. So I'll give you the other one. I'm supposed to let the guest talk, but I'm almost certain.
No, that's a good one. I would say improve. Don't be afraid to try new. And the second, be humble and willing to listen to anyone.
Yeah.
I think those are the 2. A newbie that is out there, his first day, like the amount of stuff I've learned purely by the questions he's asked me, right? Mm-hmm. Or she has asked me, that I'm like, oh, that's a different perspective. Like, I didn't think about that, which has then influenced how I guide, or influenced how I, everybody can help provide a different perspective. So the humbleness, I think, both with, mentors and the experts, being able to listen and be humble is number 1.
It's I think of the benefit of being here at the Saltwater Edge. You get the take of a light tackle guy, the surf guy, the fly guy, and they all, and the good ones listen to all around. You know what I mean? And I think you and I talked, maybe it was even off air, about, we were talking about your fly drops, and how it's, like, no, it's not my idea. I saw it work in another segment. I brought it into fly. Why don't we speak to that real quick, because it is an interesting model. You're a fly tyer, and you had a challenge, not feeling like the dread in doing something that you love. So you solved it. Explain it a little bit for the audience, then we'll do the little wrap up that we're going to do. But go ahead and tell them a little bit about your program, how to your website, and how that all works.
Yeah. So just the kind of backstory. I was doing custom orders while working full time, and was always 10 months backed up, and that weight hanging over your head of having to deliver 10 of these, olive over yellow over white, or whatever it is, just sucks the life out of me personally. So there was that. And then there was the other side of things, where it's like, I don't know if I can ever make a transition to guiding full time because our season is May to October, you know, and make a living doing it. And then, you know, luckily there are so many great people in our industry, but two of my near and dear friends, Cody Rubner and Joe Gugino, both came to me and said, here's your business model.
Yeah.
Boom. And I trialed it, and it's been great. And I'm very appreciative for all my clients who are willing to fight to get them. And I hope I deliver with what they're hoping for. But the idea
it does
is,
it lets you focus on quality too.
Yep.
Because it can't help it if you got to do 10, you know, olive over yellow over whites, you're gonna get a little, you know.
Yeah.
And so describe to the listener how it actually works. I know they do it in the plug game too. Drops.
Yeah, and you know, everything from knives to, you know, the plug world. Like it's not a new concept, but what it is every month or whatever. Some people do it quarterly, but they release small batches of whatever product, in my case flies, and you have you know, through my website you can become a member. It's free, and that grants you access to finding out when it'll happen and access to actually purchase them to get in. And it's first come first serve, which can be frustrating, but yeah, today we had one.
Had one today at noontime. It's 3:00 in the afternoon now. How did that go?
I was sold out at 12:03.
Yeah, launched at 12 and sold out at 12:03, and that was some bigger beast flies, but it's some other products too. I only glanced at it. I was driving most of the day, but I knew it was coming. I knew I was talking to you. So, what was in there? What was a variety of different flies?
Yeah, I try to, again, during the guiding season, it's hard to keep up with it. So sometimes I cut back then. But normally during the off season where I can focus on this and kind of, it's my livelihood. You know, focus on every drop. I try to have a half dozen bigger beast flies, and then 3 packs normally of, you know, bulkhead type flies, hollows.
Nice.
And then some new patterns that the slim jig that I just released in this recent one, which is a really cool fly on a jig style hook. But yeah, being able to, you know, use the creativity to dial in new stuff and kind of continue to bring that, and know that I have this allotment every month guaranteed, you know, and it just makes being able to do this feasible, you know.
Keeps it fun. It keeps you curious.
Yeah.
So at this point, how can our audience find out a little bit more about you? You know, I'd like to hear, you know, what's the best way to learn more about Ben Whalley?
Well, you can head over to my website at www.benwhalleyfishing.com, and then linked up with that is Instagram and Facebook, which are both at Ben Whalley Fishing.
Yep. And the whole fly drop and that kind of thing, that's where you become a member. It's no charge, but that's how you get the email list to let you know what's going to happen when.
Yep.
Then you got to be quick. Then you got to be quick with the click, or you might not get it, right?
Yep. And then, you know, if anybody wants to get out on the flats up in Maine, it's super special.
Sorry, you said May to October?
Mid-May, they normally show up May 9th, 10th. So I normally start mid-May and go to mid-October. And Maine's just super, super diverse fishery. And the flat scene is just, you know, it's a little trippy because you have lighthouses and pine trees lining the banks, and honestly, no competition for the most part, which is just phenomenal. You know, being able to, So, and the opportunities to sight fish for stripers, you know, either they're tailing or, you know, in clear water, watching them come down, you know, or hunt these flats. It's a pretty cool experience. I love it. I'm obsessed with it. But
You can tell. It's great.
And generally throwing, you know, bonefish flies for them.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And Maine, I don't think there's a prettier place than Maine during the summer.
Yeah.
Right about now, I'd say there's definitely prettier places than right now.
Yeah, well, we got Christmas in a couple days. Vivian's going to be all fired up. Things are good. Things are good.
And then I'm going to Florida.
Oh, nice. There you go. And so I'd remind people as well that there's quite a few Ben Whalley videos on the Saltwater Edge YouTube channel. You come down a couple of times and shot videos here in the shop, taught a couple classes. You're going to be part of Stock the Box. So there's a lot going on in Ben Whalley's world, and really appreciate you taking the time to jump on this podcast with us, and would encourage people to go check out benwhalleyfishing.com. And Ben, I won't probably talk to you again beforehand, but have a very Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Gotcha. Take care, buddy. We'll see you soon.
You too. Sounds good.
Later. Bye-bye.